Welcome back to the Fifth Generation Leadership. We got Patrick here with us again, and Grant, as always. But yeah, I'm glad to have you back. And then yeah, hopefully we can really dive into the nitty gritty of what you're trying to relay to the world.
Yeah.
So is there anything that maybe we didn't get to?
I mean, I know we were focusing mainly on kind of
Like,
my background or just general perception of different things in the Army. But Grant, did you have any specific thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm more curious to see just what are your thoughts about like what were your personal experiences, and then I want to get into the weeds on, um, you know, blackmail of political leaders,
the craziness
intertwined with human trafficking. Like what happened when we got cut off last time is I was going on a rant on Michael Flynn and how he got railroaded. It turns out he just wrote a book called The Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare, which I had no idea that he was going to do. So it's like highly appropriate. But that's what I want to transition into because that's what I'm most concerned about. And I think people feel like it's taboo, but I mean, don't we have to talk about that? If there's a
Absolutely.
concern that our political leadership is compromised in any way, like I feel a little bit being, I guess a part of the government and, saying that, like, obviously everything that I say here is my own opinions and not related to the US Army or the DoD, right? But I feel like it's taboo or it reflects badly on the team. But at the same time, whenever I feel like that, I try and focus on, it's like, well, we took an oath and the oath is to the Constitution, not to particular political leaders, not to the current establishment, not to doing things that are utilitarian or that are most expedient, but to these particular values. And I think that this is a huge threat to those values because I don't think these people in a position where they're compromised, they're not in a position where they can fulfill their own oaths that they all took.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I wanted to get into the weeds on that.
I think we kind of all like witnessed this storm that had swept through where nobody was willing to compromise, I guess. If and I don't know if they even realized that it was like happening. You know what I'm saying? Like I really feel like 2020 was this weird transitional year where people were supposed to recognize it for what it was, and the people that did, I ultimately think there was two paths that were created that year. Those that see what was happening and those that couldn't see. So what are some of your thoughts? Obviously, you went through all the same nonsense we did. You know what I mean? With the vaccine and the religious exemptions and just the nonsense. I don't really think we talked much about the pushback that you got from your leadership after the QAnon thing. The QAnon religious exemption. Was there any? I mean, was there? We talked about how you would look a certain way regardless, whether it was a religious exemption or talk about QAnon beliefs. And either way, you were going to be considered a right-wing radical. So is that what ultimately ended up happening by the people that read it?
So largely, I didn't get any direct pushback. It was all kind of covert pushback. So initially they read it, they said absolutely nothing about it. They referred me to behavioral health. They wanted me to go check if I was crazy.
No shit. Okay.
Which was unsurprising.
Dude, we can't skip past that. I gotta interrupt. What happened with that, man? Because this is like a common theme, to make the people look like they're crazy.
Yeah, of course, because clearly if I'm not, towing the line and okay with everything they're doing, there must be something wrong with me. So they picked and zeroed in on me saying that, if I'm still alive, and obviously what I meant was that, the people I'm accusing are powerful people who may not want me around. They're like,
Yeah.
oh no, we need to get you assessed.
Yeah.
And of course
Up,
that went nowhere.
implying
Yeah. I mean,
suicidal ideations, right? That's what they were
That's
trying
what
to
they were
say.
implying.
Right.
yeah.
Uh,
Wild.
yeah, of course. And that was completely not surprising. And then there was, of course, for SLC, I was due to go to SLC during COVID. It got pushed because of COVID, and they opened it back up, and I got a class date, a hard slot, and they're like, oh, you got 2 weeks to get a signature approving travel from the Secretary of the Army for travel from Fort Hood to Fort Sam Houston, which was less than 250 miles anyway. But
Now, for
so,
the just real quick, because we will have some audiences that aren't military. SLC is your senior leadership course. This is what you need to get promoted to sergeant first class,
yeah,
essentially. So you have your BLC, which is your basic leaders course, your ALC, which is your advanced leaders course. Those are for sergeant and staff sergeant, and then ultimately your board packet goes in front of a congressional type board comprised of sergeant majors. They decide if you're going to be promoted, and if your name comes up on that list, that SLC school is something that you have to do. Okay, you can't get promoted without it. So I just wanted to clarify that for anybody.
So basically they blocked that because I wasn't vaccinated, and that was kind of what prompted me to go for following through with a med board, because it was clear I was being denied progression. So
it's clear your career is done, essentially. Yeah. Okay. I went through it too, man. So I feel you. So, but you got the med board, right? Did they try blocking that? I mean, I know they did with me. They threatened how the division commander is going to review the involuntary separation packet along with the med board packet, and my fate is going to be in the decision of one man on whether I'm going to retire after 13 and a half years of service, or if he's just going to declare that I'm a piece of shit because I didn't get a vaccine. You know what I mean? That's what I got told.
So I did have enough members in my command that supported me and wanted me to basically get what I deserved as I got out. And there was others who weren't in my chain of command, sergeant majors, first sergeants, excuse me, who would come pull me aside and say, hey, we know what you sent up and we completely agree with you. And then it was always followed with an excuse. It was kind of funny. It was just like the ones who say, I almost joined the Army, but so they come to me and they'd say, I completely agree with you, but I'm in a command slot, or but I'm about to retire, but it was pretty sad.
Have you ever heard Dr. Phil's saying with that? I don't know if you watch Dr. Phil, but he always, whenever he's doing an interview and somebody happens to bring up but, he pretty much says, I don't care about anything that you just said. Like whenever you throw a but in there, like you are adding a contingency. You're like, hey, yeah, but I really don't give a shit because I got my own life to worry about,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, Grant?
Oh, I mean, that kind of made me realize, I don't know if I ever realized before this, but I was in a very similar situation where, I had to go to captain's career course because my board for 04 was coming up. And I missed that by like a month, where they made it so that we couldn't go on CDY based on vaccination status. And, but yeah, I would not have, I wouldn't have been, do you remember when they made that policy? Because that was a clear policy when all of a sudden they made the determination that you needed the Secretary of the Army's approval, or the Assistant Secretary of the Army's approval, which is like, okay, yeah, that means I'm not functionally not going to get that,
especially with short notice.
Yeah. So that's in Patrick's circumstance, like that definitively would have killed your career, even with the mandate getting rescinded now. Like that wouldn't have mattered, because you still wouldn't have been able to pick up E7 because of being denied the ability to go to SLC, at least on time. But yeah, we gotta talk about the what I want to hear about most, and like by all means talk about whatever, but I want to hear most about your firsthand experiences in Asia, where you wrote about that in the religious accommodation packet. I want to hear more details on that, because it's always interesting to hear, first person stuff as opposed to like all the open source stuff that we're able to all kind of get a hold of.
And I feel like it's all like intertwined. Like it's hard to talk about one without like talking about the other. Obviously, like I don't have the same circumstances as Patrick with the same thing that he had seen, but I know like I can't talk about my story without talking about the stuff that I had seen and gone through, and like paint the picture for like the people that haven't lived through it, if that makes sense. So feel free to bounce around, feel free to focus on one spot or another, man. Like we're dude, we're at your mercy, man. We're gonna have tons of questions. So yeah.
Yeah, so basically I was in Hawaii. I was running the emergency department, and 351st Civil Affairs Command was doing Balakatan and Salaknib planning. So they go and go out to the Philippines and all over Southeast Asia, and they plan with the foreign governments and local barangay and municipalities and things like that on how they're going to go out and engage and basically intertwine Americans with the local populace, and hopefully make them like us and that kind of thing. So the 351st didn't have any organic medics or 68 whiskeys, so because they're a reserve unit, so I guess that's just kind of the way it panned out, was they had nobody organic. So they pulled me from the ER because they wanted a E6 plus, whiskey with good combat experience, good hands-on, and I pretty much was just the only one that fit the bill, so there I was. So I got pulled, and it started planning conferences and that in the stateside, and then we went to Philippines. September 2019, I think, was my first trip to the Philippines. And as soon as we got there, it was, the planning conference joined with the Phil Army. And as soon as we got there, they were very clear that we were not to plan anything past March. Like, dead set, the generals of the Philippine Army were saying, we will not be there past March. And, we had civilians that were, like, I was attached to civil affairs, and then civilians were actually running the planning. So we had like Booz Allen Hamilton, and we had I forget the other company, but basically contractors that were really in charge of this, right?
How long was your rotation supposed to be?
So originally what they told me was it would be like a 2-week thing, and like every 6 months, and then I went out, and I ended up out there pretty much nonstop for probably 8 months, and there was
Now that's as an attachment, right? What about the main unit that had gone out? How, because you talk about even when we were talking the other day, you had mentioned about how all planning stopped after March 2020. They had gotten the word in September 2019. Ultimately, how long was there typically, deployments? You're looking at like a 1 month rotation, a 3-month rotation.
So we were supposed to have between 30 to 50,000 US troops for Pacific Pathways 2020 between February all the way through September of 2020. So this was going to be the largest mobilization of boots on ground in the Pacific since World War II. And then, simultaneously Defender 2020 was going to be happening in Europe. I wasn't a part of that, but just to kind of paint the picture, this was going to be the largest mobilization of US troops really since World War II. Apart from, of course, we had more in Iraq, Afghanistan, but we didn't have this many in the Pacific since World War II, even including Vietnam, Korea. So basically it was just astounding to me that these Philippine generals, who, we'd been doing Balakatan for 20 plus years, and we're like, okay, we know this is a thing we do every year. We give them money. They like us because we're giving them money, whether they actually like us or not. We're funding their government, funding their military, building, you know, structures for them, giving them equipment, giving them training, teaching them jungle school and all these types of things, right? So it was astounding that they were so absolutely certain that we would not be there past March 2020. And what would these foreign generals possibly know that was going to stop us from projecting power into the South China Sea and in the Philippines during the largest deployment we've had since World War II? It just didn't make sense. I'm like, okay, well, and they tried to sell it off as it was something to do with budget. And we're like, okay, well, maybe they're trying to get some more money out of us. So we're like, yeah, okay, whatever. And we just planned anyways. So as we're doing this planning, I was out there the first time. I went down to Lucerna, and we were checking out a bunch of different areas, talking to schools, talking to hospitals, doing all this kind of stuff. Well, I was there, my father passed, and so that was a whole thing. And then I stayed out there.
Sorry to hear that.
No, it's as I said before, he wasn't a good man. So I was out there and interacting with the hospitals. I saw what their healthcare was like. For example, we had a automobile accident because the roads there are just crazy. One of our vans got in an accident, and they actually called us UN peacekeepers, which I thought was insulting. But anyway, couple of ours went.
Yeah, it is. I gotta throw in that's kind of what everything kind of turned into. You know what I mean? And I can't help but to notice like the timing of it all. Like September of 2019, you're in Pacific Pathways. They're telling you not to plan for past March of 2020. I am at Fort Campbell, where my entire brigade is sent down to the US-Mexico border that subsequently got completely locked down. And we just so happen to have troops in the area at like both borders. You know what I mean? It's just wild to me. And so the fact that these government officials are calling you UN peacekeepers while there's UN operations ultimately happening in the United States and collectively across the country, and we're simultaneously experiencing this large scale military operation, at least in America, between active duty, National Guard, like DHS or whatever, between like CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, ICE, all that type of stuff. It really turned into a United Nations peacekeeping, sweeping through freaking, I don't know, man. It was wild. So I just wanted to throw that out there just to add some context, because I got some questions to ask at the end of it for sure.
Yeah, so when I was down in Lucerna, and like I took a couple of my soldiers to the hospitals for different reasons, and so for example, like they'd bring out the blood tray to draw blood, and it was caked with other people's bloods, and including the tube, like the ampules and tubes and stuff like that. Like, so this was their level of medical sophistication, was like they didn't have calcite wipes or didn't clean like things that had come prior. So I know like on a healthcare infection level that they're just not very sophisticated. People are going to get sick there. There's no real sanitation and that kind of thing. And they had outbreaks of dengue fever every year and things like this. And vaccinations were actually part of what we were trying to bring to them, including for like wildlife and things like that. By the way, just random off topic, the Army only has like 4 veterinarians for the entire Army because we can't pay them enough to get a veterinarian, which is kind of funny, but totally off topic. And we talked to the governor of Quezon, and he was bragging about his $600,000 yacht out in California and things like that. Well, he also then tells me how they only have $1.55 per citizen of Quezon province per year worth of medical socialized healthcare. So basically it was 8.5 million Filipino pesos or something like that, and it's like a 50 to 1 conversion rate. So it was pretty, pretty sad state of affairs for the people there as far as what their healthcare was. And basically it was a wet nurse in every barangay, and they had almost no medication, but basically some pots and pans and a scale and things like that. That was about as advanced as it got. uh, so it's not that I don't say this to like be down on the Filipino people at all, because I have a lot of love for the Filipino people, and they're great people while I was there. But as far as advanced medical, they have nothing you're going to compare to what we have in the US, like at all.
So you mentioned dengue fever, and having dug into the weeds on COVID and vaccines and stuff, you come across a story of what happened with a prior version of the dengue fever vaccine, where it's kind of the quintessential example of antibody dependent enhancement, which killed a bunch of children. You said that you came out there, and one of the things that you guys were trying to bring was vaccines. Was that a topic of discussion or an issue where there was any sort of hostility from the local population of memory from that, or was it just totally like a non-issue?
Totally non-issue at the time.
And it's weird that we highlight the just the condition of like the overall people at the bottom of the barrel, and there really is only one thing to blame, and it is the governments. I mean, it is the country's governments, or whatever government is in charge of their government, essentially. And the media has a really good way of distracting us from that, and to making us pick fights with each other under the illusion of choice, that we have the choice between right and left and whatever, but really it's all part of the same system, and it's a system that is oppressing the little people on a mass scale. And it's really not even about money. It's purely power, and money is what keeps us the slave.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'll say in the Philippines, I observed this, that it was the only country I'd ever gone where I saw a homeless mother with a newborn child sleeping on the streets, like in downtown Manila, kind of thing. And this wasn't an uncommon sight, right? So just
That's
very,
heart-wrenching.
yeah, just very mass poverty in that sense. But what I realized is the people are so good that the only ones that would attain any power were the ones who wanted to be involved in other people's business and wanted to tell them what to do. Everybody else pretty much minded their own business, and that's why they were getting trampled on by corrupt bureaucrats and politicians that did not care about their well-being. Because pretty much you would think the cream rises to the top, but in politics it seems to be the opposite. The ones who are willing to abuse and step on others, those are the ones who get involved and who rise to the top.
This
Yeah, I
is
mean,
the
what kind of people want power? What kind of people want power
For
that
others.
allows them to coerce other people, essentially? Because power, if it's you being healthier, or you building up your community and just being able to do more, enhancing positive freedom through cooperative means, totally fine. That's most normal people, but
And you really,
it's a specific kind of person that wants to get power to be able to coerce other people.
yeah, and you really see through it there when every school you do see, or every town hall, or every basketball court, they're all named after current politicians who they slap their name on it, and they put up a old style socialist billboard with their picture like looking to the sky, and like this whole like very propaganda.
we have a very modern day equivalent of that with hospital donors and whatnot, or anybody that starts like a community center or whatnot. It's never and just like you talked about the Filipino people being like good people, I think for the most part, everybody else is too. Everybody's focusing on what's going on inside of their house, and it's the people that mingle outside of other businesses and whatnot. And it's the archetype of chaos, man. It's the topsy-turvy world. Right is wrong, wrong is right. and you know, good is bad, bad is good, and the people that are exploiting it are unfortunately the people that win, and none of us want to behave like that because we don't want to think bad is good and good is bad. You know, we want good to be good and bad to be bad, and no in between. You know.
Yeah.
So
So
Patrick, you're facing these challenges, right? And like Rodney said, it's like that's kind of what we're dealing with all over the world, this dynamic, but it's more obvious there because the amount of capital that's present is way lower.
Mhm.
You know, they aren't, you know, holding the world reserve currency, so they don't get the benefits that we do from being able to
Mhm.
export dollars, right? So so it's just a little bit more obvious. But in
Yep.
spite of those challenges, with there being less wealth available and the same corruption that I imagine is everywhere, just with less overall wealth,
Mhm.
were you able to make a positive impact just by being a person on the ground that probably resources were limited, but you know, you obviously cared and wanted to? Were you able to do anything positive?
I think we did. We did some, you know, short-lived, most likely, but positive things in the short term, and really just us showing up to spend money in that community, interacting, you know, interacting with teachers, interacting with school children, showing them that like, hey, somebody does care, somebody's showing up. I like to think that has a positive effect as a whole on.
hearts and minds.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
mean that's largely the CA game, right? But
right. Yeah. So for anybody that isn't aware, the army has long ago stopped being like mostly conflict, and sure we declare this war on terrorism, but a lot of our efforts go towards training foreign militaries, go towards like establishing local infrastructure, building schools, building hospitals and whatnot. And for the most part, the people on the ground that are making that stuff happen are people of good intentions. You know what I mean? Like the people that think that they're making a positive impact, and to some extent they probably are, but there's also unfortunately somebody at the top that's reaping the benefit
mhm.
of said infrastructure, you know. So
Yeah, definitely.
what happened after March 2020?
So after, or you mean during March when I went to Malaysia, or which one?
Yeah, so when, okay, the planning was supposed to stop.
Yep.
Obviously you were on the Pacific pathways when lockdowns happened, I would assume, right? How'd that
Yes.
impact you guys over there?
So initially we were in Philippines as you know, January 2020 onset, and we were actually there because the tall volcano was going off. So you know, we were responding to how do we you know, help plan for the impact of all these displaced personnel, all these, you know, indigenous types, and when I say indigenous, I don't mean Filipino, I mean the native Filipino. There's different groups. So like the Itais, who basically don't have a set home. They're kind of I don't know
Nomadic,
how to describe them without saying they're a little bit
nomadic.
shared, nomadic, not
Yeah.
really communist, but they don't believe in possession or ownership. Everything that's everywhere is everyone's. Um, they're interesting, and they'll steal things out of your your gear real quick. Don't leave a dagger around. But
Because it's really theirs. Because what's yours is theirs. You
yeah,
know.
it's just a very different mindset. But
Yeah, yeah.
so of course, with them being displaced from Tall Volcano, there was a big risk for human trafficking, as you know, Manila and Philippines already has mass prostitution, mass human trafficking, labor trafficking. You know, so it's very common sending Filipino, especially the women, overseas to work overseas and send money back home to their families. And for a lot of them, you know, you see it in a different way because that's what, you know, takes care of their family. It's what feeds their family, and you can't be blaming them for doing what they can with what they've got. You know, So it kind of puts it under a different tone, but then you start to see the control factors over it, where there's politicians creating avenues to send them to certain areas to work, and it's like, okay, well, what's in it for that politician to set up this job opportunity? So, but anyway, so we were there in January, and I headed up north, and we saw a couple of the military bases up there, another human trafficking situation, and as we were coming out, it was February 8th, 2020, and that was when Duarte terminated the visiting forces agreement, and it was as we were flying out, and that was in response to two Democratic senators, the president pro tempore and majority whip at the time I wrote my disclosure. They sanctioned De La Rosa, one of the Philippine police chiefs, for allegedly being a part of extrajudicial killings. And now I know that yes, those did happen, not necessarily by that police chief, but the extrajudicial killings regarding drug users or accused drug users in the Philippines were common. So that was in relation to that. So basically, we can only conclude, though, that stopping all those troops going to the Philippines could only come from really one of two things that would have put a full stop to the U.S. military, projecting power. The first is obviously COVID, and the second would be the termination of the visiting forces agreement. So if it was COVID, then these generals knew as much as 3 months in advance that we would, as much as 3 months in advance before COVID allegedly started in Wuhan, China, that there would be a global pandemic. And alternatively, they knew that these senators would be sanctioning De La Rosa, which means it was coordinated with the Democratic Party to sanction him and give an excuse to remove the visiting forces agreement. After the scam election, and I know, Rodney, you can't say that, but or Grant, you can't say that. I'm going to say that. So after the stolen election, it was about 3 months until they restored the visiting forces agreement, but only after it was clear that Trump was out and Biden was officially taking power. So I very much think that the Democrats coordinated with China and the Philippines to stop the United States from projecting power into the South China Sea. When I was researching human trafficking, just because I was there and I was doing this as a medic, and that was kind of my job, right? Was to know my surroundings, know what's going on, and at least have some awareness of it, know what I'm looking for to avoid it, or how I can help them, or just the simple things. And around that same time as I started researching it, I found Q, probably largely through researching it. And Q was referring to specific Democrats and their corruption and connection to human trafficking, and I started seeing the connections to China. So I did my homework, and I found that the connections were not few or far between. It was really overwhelming and blatantly obvious how connected and tied in the Democrats and China really are, but from everything from the trained Marxist communist activist groups like Black Lives Matter and Antifa, to the investigation in Harvard University for $380 million from China, the Thousand Talents program, basically greasing the wheels of all major universities in the United States, which all universities lean leftist, lean liberal, and seem to support communist ideals. And out of the 2018 House and Senate, it was 40 of the 2018 election members were from Harvard University, and then it was the alma mater
Oh,
to
wow.
yeah,
I didn't know that.
alma mater to Barack Obama, Elizabeth Warren, Adam Schiff. But yeah, so I started realizing just how many were coming from places that were already under investigation for taking money, bribes from China, and those were becoming our politicians, largely on the Democrat side, but also some on the Republican. I
Yeah,
started
and
seeing,
it's important to always bring that up, especially if and I try and tell people on active duty, we have First Amendment rights, but this is a Hatch Act, but that prohibits partisan political
yeah,
engagement
it,
where you're supporting a particular political party, and like you
Well,
said, there's it's important to
yeah.
note that there's some Republicans that are doing the exact same thing.
Oh,
It might just
definitely.
be a difference in terms of numbers, but it's not a party affiliation specific thing. It's not
they're
specifically partisan.
they're all part of the same freaking groups, man. They all go to the same dinner parties. They all have the same investment ties. They all have the same donors. They all have the same, man. It's crazy. And if anybody thinks that like human trafficking isn't that big of an issue or isn't doesn't have ties with like government or military, I strongly urge anybody to go look up the 1988 Franklin cover up that had happened in freaking Boys Town, Nebraska, with a very large group of prominent Republicans and independent investors and bank owner or credit union owners, and they were money laundering and all sorts of crazy stuff, right? Fast forward a little bit, let's not forget that Pizzagate was just some crazy right wing conspiracy theory, and then what? Within 2 years, Epstein Island freaking happened, right? And then not only did Epstein Island happen, dude got schwacked inside of a, let's go ahead and call a prison a government facility. They might be privatized, but I mean, they're very governmental structured, supposed to be guarded. You have people disappearing, you got people residing over certain court cases and whatnot. Like, it is very evident that it's very evident what is going on, and
Don't
it's almost like people are waiting for the government to come out and acknowledge that it's going on, and they're not gonna acknowledge that it's going on because there's huge implications in it all.
and
Just like
let's
we're never going to learn about Epstein because so many people, like these people, learn how to blackmail each other and get each other involved into just craziness, man, that if they
What? Yeah.
ever stepped out of line, they have dirt against them,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, I just want to point out that the judge on the Epstein case also had their family shot up, and I think it was their husband or kid was killed when their house was shot up just before the trial.
Very obvious attempts to intimidate people. I mean, either intimidate, silence, freaking destroy, whatever. I mean,
Mhm.
all of the above doesn't
One
really matter. You just got to get your point
Yeah.
across. You just got to
one
get your point across that you mean business and you're going to do whatever it takes to protect your own name, I guess. But the problem is these people all play dirty as hell. So,
one thing I want to, in terms of playing dirty, right? I want to hone in on what you were talking about, Patrick, with how these extrajudicial killings that were happening in the Philippines, where that was happening,
Mhm.
right? But then all of a sudden it became an issue.
Yeah, well, and it was actually over a year and a half after it happened.
Exactly. So I just kind of want to focus in on that because I think that's a really something important to consider, that I think that's one of these common tactics, techniques, and procedures of people that are trying to
Yeah.
operate in a way that I would classify that as corruption, right? If you're going to look the other way and then only decide to enforce the law like lawfare, I think that's kind of like the common thing that's happening, where there's so many different rules. Laws aren't necessarily equated with morality. I think in this case with extrajudicial killings, it is. But I think that's a very reasonable hypothesis to say that there was a reason for that. It's not that just that all of a sudden people within our government grew a conscience and they're like, you know what, we're all of a sudden very concerned about extrajudicial killings. Because what are some of the other crimes
and
and
they don't give a
happening
shit
to people?
about. Yeah.
Yeah, that,
Two,
yeah. So
two
that's
senators in the United States do not give a shit about some extrajudicial killings 2 years ago in a foreign third world country. They do not. I promise the American people that that was not the top of their concern. They only took action on it if it is to affect an outcome that they desire.
yeah, because everything that you do, I'm sure that wasn't easy to coordinate, right? Like you only have so much time, so many resources, and there's a lot of bad things that happen all across the world. But I just wanted to focus in on that because it's really easy to use things like that as cover and say, well, gee, like that is bad. And it's like, well, yeah, it is bad, but
Yeah.
bad stuff happens everywhere, all across the world, really, really terrible things. The United States government can't do anything to stop all of it. And so when you start having the presupposition that the United States government has an obligation to stop all of it, it gives wide latitude to people with special interests to target individual opportunities that can be profitable for whatever reason, under the guise and justification of, oh, well, we're just trying to enforce international norms and international standards and law.
I mean, every politician has an agenda, right? So with Trump, obviously, it was the wall, right? He was all about it. And with the Democrats, it's, whether it's the LGBT or whatever, I don't even track what their agenda is anymore because it's kind of all over the place. But
It's out of control, man.
whatever. But so, but not a one of them ever put homeless Americans first. Not one. That was never
Yeah.
an agenda focus, and you cannot uh, logically excuse the amount of money we spend on defense budget and the amount of money we spend on random stupid research of butterfly mating in Antarctica or whatever the hell it is, and think that these people are actually concerned about the problem that is most prevalent or the problem that helps the people first. That's not the way that the government works. It's just not. I do want to just go over 2 paragraphs from my disclosure and just read them in regards to Harvard and what I saw for connections for China, because I think these are probably the 2 most damning paragraphs of just straight, easy connections that everybody can find. And this is,
Yeah, please do.
Tear it up, man.
Yep. So in paragraph 21 in my disclosure, Harvard University, which was under investigation for taking $380 million in bribes from China, is the alma mater to Barack Obama, Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer, and 40 members of the 2018 Democratic Congress elect. The same Harvard University where Charles Lieber worked as head of microbiology before being arrested January 28th, 2020 for trafficking biological weapons to the Wuhan Institute of China or Virology in China. 2 of Dr. Lieber's assistants were in fact lieutenants in the People's Liberation Army of China. The Charles Lieber Foundation was funded primarily by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation also gave more funding to the World Health Organization than the United States government. The World Health Organization assisted China in covering up the numbers and origin early on during the outbreak. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has direct ties to nearly all labs in China, the WHO, the NIH, the Pure Bright Institute, which holds the coronavirus patent, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who we now know was invested in gain-of-function research at Wuhan lab, Dr. Deborah Birx, and Planned Parenthood. His father, Bill Gates' father, was one of the founding members of the Planned Parenthood eugenics program. Bill Gates held Event 201 in October 2019, 1 month before the onset of COVID-19, in which he wargamed with Johns Hopkins University, the central source of COVID tracking for the Arctis tracker, a coronavirus pandemic. In 2010, Bill Gates is quoted to have said, "The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. This is the same man who appears on the flight logs visiting Epstein Island and whose Washington state compound was raided for a collection of 6,000 child rape images, although a grounds worker took the fall. Now, remember, we are talking about the creator and founder of Microsoft here, who allegedly did not know what internet traffic was coming and going from his compound. Though I will not dive. So that right there, I gotta point that out, because how could we, in our right minds, see those points of fact about Harvard, China, Bill Gates, and the very clear connection between Democrats, Harvard, or Democrats, higher institution, China, and the viruses, and Bill Gates. Why has Bill Gates not been drugged before Congress to testify? Why has not a single interview happened? And when I say he's been to Epstein Island, they have records of 26 times he's been to Epstein Island. He's got his own jets. I don't know why he didn't use them.
Because there were parties happening on that airplane, man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
how dumb are we?
It's pretty damning. It's pretty damning.
That's what I want to know. Like, how dumb are we as American citizens that this is right in front of us, staring us in the face, and we won't even ask the question?
Yeah, I mean, I had a conversation with an epidemiologist in the Army about this stuff, and it was early on. And I was like, I don't trust the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and their role in all this, because like clearly Bill Gates has a long-standing goal of increasing vaccine uptake. Like he wants people across the world to take regular vaccines, and this is very much in line with that objective. And if you look and you ask Cui Bono, and you look at what he said that he's wanted and what has happened, he's gotten a lot of what he wanted. And this dude was just like, oh no, like they're a good organization, they do good work, like I've worked with them. And of course he went to Johns Hopkins, right? And what was one of the other institutions that was really, so I think a lot of these people, they at the lower levels, I really think that they
mean well.
Yeah, they mean well, but just underestimate the degree to which people that kind of worm their way to the top are criminal psychopaths.
Yeah, absolutely.
That just really
You almost
do not
have to be.
Well, yeah,
you almost have to be like a psychopath or a narcissist, or I mean, you either really want to do good and make a change, or you're a narcissistic psychopath. And that's why you want to be in this world leadership position, and you'll do damn near anything that it takes. Even if your intentions are good, you still have connections to people whose intentions are bad. And if you're trying to get your way to the top, you're not going to double cross these people. You're not going to, paint them in a bad light, or, do anything that makes them question you in a bad light. You're going to toe the line of exactly how they want to do things.
Well, it's just motivated reasoning, right? It's motivated reasoning where you don't want to believe that you're the bad guy or that you're helping bad guys. You want to believe that you're on the right side of history and that you're doing good work and everything that you're doing is worthwhile. And,
I think everyone's the hero of their own story, right?
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, that's incredibly damning. One of the other things that you mentioned people taking money from the CCP, China, like especially these large endowments at Ivy League universities, talking about politicians taking money. The thing that blows my mind that everybody knows but aren't, how can Eric Swalwell have such a close relationship with a member of the Chinese Communist Party and have that not be an issue? I mean, like, look at the committee that he's on, and yeah, she is a Chinese spy.
Mhm.
How is that not being investigated? I mean, perhaps it is being investigated, but why is this not like, it's things like that, individuals, like the example that you gave. um maybe there's nothing there. Maybe we're all just idiots and we're making stuff up. But
Yeah,
please, for
could
the
be
love of
nothing.
God, yeah, please, for the love of God, investigate it and explain to us how this is not a huge national security concern.
Well, and yeah, and that's really the thing. Like, I get it. There's probably, maybe Q is legitimately some military operate, and they've got the whole thing under control. Maybe. I don't know, right? Uh, I can't make the decision to, for example, receive the vaccine, which I know was in assistance of China and the cover up of a stolen election. I was put in a position where I could not make the decision to obey what they claimed was a lawful order because of the things I know that they had simply not attempted to answer to. They didn't give an explanation. They didn't attempt to, they didn't even ask the question. So here I am. All I wanted to do was follow my oath. And
I didn't know nearly the amount of information that you knew. For me, it was a lot more simple, where my appraisal of the information that was available was that the absolute risk reduction for young, healthy males, which is the demographic that I'm in, was negative. That
yeah,
was my appraisal, and that wasn't super clear at the time. But that was my position, and it's like, I'm a scientist technically, right? So it's like, that's my position. And if you can take somebody that has scientific training and comes to that conclusion, and you can force me to do something that I think is not in the best interest of my health and say that it's in the best interest of my health, then, and I'm going to comply with that, what hope does everybody else have? What hope does a junior private have when that junior private feels like it's not the right thing for them, and no one's standing up for them and saying,
it's
like, hey, there's different perspectives on this. I don't believe you. I don't like that. Oh, the CDC said, I've never cared. I don't care what the CDC says. I care what
Right. Yeah.
individual physicians, epidemiologists, people that have a track record of engaging in sound clinical reasoning, bringing the data and having priors that I share in terms of ethics and morality, and then, applying sound reasoning to raw data in a way that makes sense to me. Like, that's who I trust, not bureaucrats. I don't trust
And
bureaucrats.
it's not like the CDC and FDA has like an amazing track record either.
No, they have a
You know what I
terrible
mean?
track record.
Yeah. So
So,
I don't know why they all of a sudden became the
well, not to
the
mention
law.
Pfizer, right?
You know?
Pfizer's the biggest in terms of fines, right? In terms of fines that a company is paid out for engaging in criminal activity, Pfizer's the biggest private criminal organization in the history of the world. I mean, how
It
many
just never
billions of,
falls under them.
no,
It just always falls on
they've literally
it
paid
always
billions of dollars in fines. Pfizer has,
yeah.
and perhaps more than any other
Mhm.
company
But it
in the
doesn't
history
matter
in
as
history.
long as they can push it out there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
They're
Well, that's the
making
thing,
their
is even
money.
after the fines, it's still profitable. So it's
Mhm.
like, that's not really providing the right,
Yeah,
and
there's no
yeah, a
incentive for
strong
them
enough
to do the
incentive for
right thing.
deterrence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're on the plane flying out on February 8th, you said?
Flying out of Philippines back to Hawaii. Yep.
Back to Hawaii. All right. Well, crap. I think I already exited out. But just to put that into perspective for people, the stock market began to crash on February 10th. February 13th, I think, something like that, within, plus or minus 5 days or so. And then it's odd that you talk about, March, and that being the turnaround point, because what did we experience? We ultimately experienced a stock market crash leading from February 13th-ish until March 10th-ish, like exactly damn near 30 days. And then we just had the craziness that was 2020 and 2021, you
Yeah.
know, with a whole lot of crypto manipulation and market manipulation. So do you think, I mean, what was it all about? Was it specifically for the elections?
I think there was multiple benefits to the people who were behind it. So benefit in the sense that they could oust Trump, a benefit in the sense that they could push this drug and make billions, a benefit in the sense they could quell Hong Kong. They shut down protests and freedom movements pretty much around the world. They were able to test how compliant people are.
Yeah,
you
for
know,
sure.
Everybody thinks that that old picture of Nazis in World War II, and there's the one guy not giving the Nazi salute. Everyone thinks they're him. If you got the vaccine, you're not him. They're one of the others. So it, I
And I gotta know, man, because I had a very I guess radical view of COVID. I'm not in the medical community. You're a 68 whiskey. You're working within hospitals. You're dealing with soldiers coming into sick call. I'm assuming you're dealing with stuff going on at the hospital. I mean, what did you see from COVID, and what did you see from the vaccine?
So from COVID itself, so we gotta think we're in this generation where we grew up with this CGI and all these movies, and everything is exciting and it's supposed to be a certain way. And you've got movies like Contagion, and you've got other disaster movies, and so now they throw out the big pandemic, right? So we're expecting pandemic. We're expecting people to be dying like it's the plague in the Black Death. Okay. We're expecting maybe 10% of the population might die given the numbers that they were pushing. So we're like, okay, so I should have known somebody pretty early on. I should have seen somebody close to me that would
Right,
die.
dude.
I should have seen
Right,
somebody in my unit, in my
right.
hospital. I still to this day, like, not saying nobody died of COVID, but still to this day, I don't know anybody that actually died of COVID at all.
I gotta throw something in there because I was down at the border during COVID lockdowns, and a little bit of the dynamic of the border. We are active duty military that are attached to Customs and Border Patrol agents down at the border, uh, occupying little security positions along the Rio Grande and underneath like main world trade bridges and stuff like that. And we're ultimately two active duty soldiers sitting side by side in this vehicle. And after our shift, I got dogs barking in the background. Hopefully it's not too crazy. After our shift, we go to we go to different rooms with different roommates who in turn go to different shifts with different people who have different roommates. And it was like a recipe for disaster, man. And it was, and this was they had shut down like nobody's going home for funerals, nobody's going home for childbirths, nobody's going home for X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, but yet at the same time, we're working through it, right? It seems the only people that got COVID, right, or that went and got tested for COVID are the ones that wanted a break from the day on, day off schedule that was Border
It
Patrol.
was incentivized.
It was incentivized, man. You got hooked up for going to get tested and claiming that you have COVID. But either way, so I'm like, man, so I have 40 soldiers underneath me, right? And then I have two other National Guard units attached to me. And I'm like, man, so, you're looking at like 120 people that I'm responsible for. And I'm like, how aren't any of these people coming up to me being like, hey, Sergeant, can I talk to you? I just found out that my mom my brother, my dad, my grandma, my grandpa. Dude, it was like
Nobody.
nowhere, right? And my first experienced death was after I got home. So in the middle of last year, I think it's been like exactly a year. Somebody that was our next door neighbor, she mysteriously died of COVID. And then my uncle mysteriously died of COVID pneumonia or whatever. But the other thing is, like, nobody was finding dead people in their house. People were only dying in hospitals. Like, you could almost associate, like, if there was some nefarious thing going on, then hospitals were surely the gas chambers of the
and I think that
2020 through 2022.
I think that is essentially what happened. So the protocols put out by Fauci and the CDC and
for the remdesivir.
Well, so what they did was they took away antibiotics, they took away ivermectin, hydrochloroquine, monoclonal antibodies. They had us all put a mask on our face to walk around, right? So let's just assume
that never got washed.
Well, yeah.
Dude, I am horrible about washing my hands, man. I am. I'm gonna assume that most other guys are very similar, especially people that come from like a grunt style like me. Dude, I touched door handles, gas pumps, freaking ATM stuff, and then I'd go through freaking McDonald's drive-through and shove French fries in my mouth, dude. Like, well, why didn't I get sick? Why didn't I get, like, you know what I mean? It's just, there's so much stuff that didn't make sense that was going on at the time. And like everybody was ignoring it, it seemed like.
Well, so think of it this way. We know about the fatal funnel, right? So what happens when you put a mask on is if it does work, if it does stop any coronavirus particles from exiting your airway, and it would only really work for those who are sick, not for those who are not sick, but just assuming it did work, and you have a regular cold or flu, right? Now those particles that are stopped have to go somewhere. They don't just hit the cloth and stop. These are traveling at hundreds of miles per hour as they're leaving your airway, so they're going to reflect towards the path of least resistance. Your esophagus is open, and they're going to go down your esophagus because that's the only open pathway. So as these particles, these bacteria go down your esophagus, they're going to go to your lungs, and that's going to cause a pneumonia. But when you get a pneumonia, what was the treatment protocol? And first off, if you have any cold or flu symptoms, you're tested for COVID. Okay, now you're COVID positive because the PCR tests for all coronavirus particles. Yeah. So, okay, now you have COVID and you have a pneumonia because you've been wearing a mask. But because you have COVID, you're not going to get antibiotics. You're going to get Tylenol. I kid you not. Or remdesivir, which was this crazy expensive drug. And then they're going
that was a sure death sentence.
Yeah, and then
look at what happened with the ventilators at the beginning, right?
Well, that's what I'm getting to. So what happens if you put a person on a ventilator when they have a pneumonia? You're putting positive air pressure ventilation, and you're compressing that bacteria down into the bottom of the lungs. And there's a condition, literally ventilator associated pneumonia, right? So we were causing people to get sicker while denying them the proper medical intervention of treatment of antibodies and antibacterial, and nobody was given a treatment protocol to give penicillin or amoxicillin to a COVID patient. So
known antivirals, known antibiotics.
So basically the protocol that was pushed down from the top ensured that people who had the regular flu would test positive, would get sicker, and would not receive proper care and treatment.
So, I've looked into this a lot. That's actually the first time anybody's explained that with the masks. You said esophagus. I'm sure you meant trachea, right?
Well,
like path of least resistance. Yeah. Just to be clear for any listeners that wanted to like sharpshoot us, right? That's the first time.
I'm a medic, not a doctor.
Yeah. That's the first time that I've heard that, but that makes sense. Like the particles are going to reflect, and they're not necessarily going to get stuck in the mask, but most of them are going to pass through.
Well,
but the ones that don't like especially bacteria, which isn't the COVID, right?
And
It's just bacteria accumulates. That mass can act like a petri dish. They did studies on that where they found, you know, a high concentration of bacteria on these masks. That boom goes down your trachea. You know, you get a bacterial infection. It gets bad enough that you get put on a vent. Then that makes it even worse. And the entire time, instead of doing what's always been the standard, where they typically what would they would do a culture to see what bacteria is in there, so that they could prescribe the appropriate antibiotic, right? And they're like, no, you tested positive for COVID, so it's COVID. That's the reason you're sick. And meanwhile, you got people dying of bacterial pneumonia in the COVID ward.
And then the hospital's being paid for every ventilator, every positive COVID, and every COVID death. So they're being rewarded for effectively killing you.
Yeah. So people are following
and the fact that nobody could come in. You know what I mean? Like that was sketchy all by itself. You know what I mean? Like
So
you couldn't even go say goodbye to your loved ones. And you mean to tell me we don't have like suits? We don't have nothing that we could have accommodated two people saying goodbye to each other.
or just
are we that
let
against
patients,
like being a human?
let patients assume the risk. Let
Yeah.
patients assume the risk. Why can't
and
an elderly patient that wants to see family assume that risk? If it's more important to them to see family and not have a mask on their face and not be gowned up, it's like, oh, we got to protect you in spite of yourself. It's violating what we call evidence-based practice.
now,
Because patient values are an important component of decision making in medical, and they just totally threw them out the window.
And it gets better. Guess who wrote a paper on the 1918 flu suggesting that the wearing of masks exacerbated the illness?
I bet Fauci did.
Fauci?
Yeah, doesn't surprise me at all. Because I mean, he said things that made sense in certain contexts, like off the bat. He said the thing that he said about the mask, he wasn't lying.
Yeah, he changed his story every day or two.
When he said they wouldn't make a big difference.
When did you ultimately get out?
30 December was my ETS date, and I got my DD 214 in 29 November. So
okay, I don't know about you. So when I realized that nobody gave a shit about me, dude, I just stopped coming in, man. And they didn't even want me there anyways because I'm a E7 saying stuff, dude. And nobody gave a shit that you would think like, you know, after like a month of not showing up, somebody would call and at least make sure you're alive and whatnot. Dude, nobody like reached. I mean, obviously people I talked to and whatnot, but as far as like leadership and whatnot, nobody gave a shit that I wasn't there, man.
Yeah,
they didn't want me there. So did you stop going in before you had gotten out? Like, okay, before you started the med board process, you were still working in the hospital or some sort of medical treatment facility?
I
effects of the vaccine?
I had PCS to Fort Hood, and I was a battalion senior medic for a well, I don't want to dox the battalion because, you know, and not needed, but basically they the last 6 months before I got out, I just showed up to formation and I just ditch. I didn't do PT for almost a year now. I should probably go for a jog, but in all seriousness, like I would show up to formation and I would just leave right after, and nobody gave a shit. And then the last couple months, once it was clear I was you know, I've done my med board stuff and it was clear I was getting the med board, I just I talked to my commander. I'm like, hey, I've already handed off my hand receipt. I've handed off my office, my laptop. I'm going to put in 29 days of leave. I'm going to come back for a day, sign in, and I'm going to put in 29 days of leave. And he's like, okay.
That's cool. So the vaccine. So I think I went to Pathfinder in April or May, or maybe it was June. And it was during that time that I found out that they were marching. They were lining up all the unvaccinated soldiers outside of the battalion conference room. It's like a big meeting room for the head honchos, I guess, for any viewers watching. And soldiers were instructed to stand outside, knock on the door, come in, and when they come in, they're presented before the BC, the sergeant major, all the commanders, and all the first sergeants, and they're there by themselves, right? Like nobody with them, nobody to have their back, and they are being hounded on why they're not getting the COVID vaccine. Now, the COVID vaccine wasn't even mandatory until August, I think, August of 2021. So from April until August of 2021, or somewhere around that, my dates might be a little bit shoddy, my memory's shitty. But you had a lot of units like pushing this this percentage base, right? I know Fort Campbell, at least my battalion, they wanted 90% vaccination rate before it was even mandatory. So I ultimately came back from leave and found out that it was going to be mandatory, and I had already been making strides to do a med board because I seen it coming. But so from August until when it was mandated until 6 months before December timeframe, were you working with in like the treatment facility, or were you working in the hospital? Were you seeing people coming in that you knew were vaccinated, and you're seeing like certain signs, symptoms?
I was only seeing sick people who'd already been vaccinated. We did have similar pushes from the command to get to a certain number. I think it was 85% is what they were going for in my battalion. It was kind of funny because of course, as battalion senior medic, I was making the command and staff slides that showed our percentages. So I went ahead and switched those who were vaccinated to red and those who were not to green for a while. So till I
told them I wouldn't participate, dude. They were wanting me to like counsel. That's good. That's a good
pretty
little switch up right
just
there.
passive aggressive. Yeah. I had a good lieutenant back in the day that told me in everything you do have just a little bit of dissent.
Yeah.
But
that's good, man.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are some of the things that you're seeing? What are some of the stuff that you're dealing with?
So it wasn't that much. It was probably a dozen different positive cases, and it was generally it would be people who were vaccinated, but then it would also be the same people more than once.
The people abusing the system, probably.
Exactly. The sick call rangers.
So the sick call rangers. So anybody like watching that doesn't know, like the Army, like especially ones that go out to the field or have a very high demand, very high op tempo, and are in the field all the time, training all the time. Soldiers, including leaders, will come up with any way possible to just ditch out of just that one. You know what I mean? And it's not like, it's usually not nefarious, or it's just like, but then you have the people that do it all the time, and they're the same people that always dip out. And I'm assuming, and they're the same people that ruin the med board system for us when we're trying to med board, try to make sure that we get our highest percentage rates for the ailments that the Army has caused us. And we have every other sick call ranger, claiming he has a bum knee or an illness or an infection. But
just to give a hard example of something to support what Rodney's saying, I have a friend that is in command right now, and you'll never know who it is, but I will tell you that he lost 10% of his soldiers to the med board process, and all of them had less than 18 months of service and got at least 70% disability. So to make sense of that, being that junior with that much disability, they are now going to get paid more to do nothing as a civilian than they would have gotten paid if they didn't go to sick call and they just kept trying to do their job. So like these are the incentives that are aligned. And then when people like Rodney and Patrick go, that have combat experience, that have been injured over more than a decade of service, they're getting the same disability ratings because they're not going in. There's literally on Reddit, there are spreadsheets of the things that you need to say in order to maximize your disability. And it's really
Dang,
easy
wish
to
I
look
knew
at these
that.
folks. Yeah, it's really easy
I
to look
swear
at these
people
folks.
come in with the intention to do it.
Yes, but
you
it's
know, it's almost like lining yourself up with an amazing lawsuit.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you slipped on a floor in some Walmart or something, and now you're being paid for the rest of your life. I legitimately think some people like strategize the army like that.
Yeah,
Because
there's
there's people that
definitely
come
They
in
do.
from
that
day
do.
one.
They
and they
definitely do. It happens. I'm not going to comment as to how common it is, but I can guarantee you that it happens because I've
Yeah.
seen the documents like open source.
And at the same
Right.
time, the ones that are actually injured and like clearly can't even walk straight, and they're like 2
Yeah.
years in the med board
Yeah.
process with just absolute nonsense. Yeah.
And I've
It was
also
a fight for me. I never went to sick hall, man. I
know
had to like
because yeah,
pull
that's not
shit out of my
then
ass.
it's not documented. So
Luckily, I got
it's
blown up back in the day.
and it's
You
really
know?
it's really easy to because you didn't have a choice there. You had to go to rehab, and so that was all in the system. But it's really easy to look at these folks and be hypercritical. But the way that I look at it is, hey, it's incentives, and what's the only thing to keep you from doing that? You know, and
Right.
take loyalty,
Values.
integrity, right?
Values,
These values.
pride, yeah.
But when you're looking at senior leaders that are engaging in obvious hypocrisy, you know, the way that we came out of Afghanistan, like everybody sees that. They see that there's no accountability. And so
You
why
can't really
wouldn't
blame people for wanting to cheat the system.
why wouldn't you get yours? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
if our Secretary of Defense can you know, hold stock in Raytheon and Tenet Healthcare and make you know, millions of dollars literally
Yeah.
with in combination with arms like that Raytheon is selling that go to Ukraine, you know, vaccine uptake increasing the value of Tenet Healthcare stock. How could you look at that as a junior soldier if you're aware of things like that? Not all of them are, but I'm sure some of them are, and not think, well, I'm going to get mine. I mean, what's my, you know, $2,000 a month in disability compared to that, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not
Okay.
hurting anyone. So, like, I just wanted to support that because it can kind of sound like what you were saying. There's a definite factual basis for.
Yeah. Well, so for the viewers, just so you understand, we're all kind of a little bit salty for our years in service. So
yeah. I
we
mean,
both love the soldiers, and we also have those things that will always annoy us about certain soldiers.
yeah, because there are some soldiers that like just weren't a soldier. You know what I mean? Like, uh, I'm trying to, you know, like you see the input from like people that are part of a team, and then you see the input from the person that's a member of that team, but not being a team member. You know what I mean? And that's really where like the saltiness comes from. And you're like, dude, you know, I'm out here grinding all the time. You know, what's your excuse? You know, but I also see what you're saying. Like, what is the point of trying to do the right thing when the leaders that are above us don't do the right thing? You know, what's the example that's being set? And I understand that.
And just going
So,
in on the leadership side of this, you know, from a platoon sergeant perspective, when I was a platoon sergeant, 4 times, but the soldiers who perform, the ones who are your best soldiers, you have to beat on those soldiers and give them every task that has to get done, because your hires are expecting every single thing that they give to you has to be done to standard, right? You can't afford to give it to the ones that are unreliable, the ones that are sick call rangers, the ones that are you know, slacking and dragging ass. So the ones that are actually working hard, you end up basically pounding them into the dirt because
for sure,
you have to use them because they're the only ones you got.
Yeah, this is great. This is great stuff because this is getting into the like real weeds of leadership and a bureaucracy, like of what really happens that people don't talk about. Because the army answer, what's the army answer if you have a soldier that's underperforming? Well, you got to counsel him, right?
Yeah,
I shouldn't even said. I should have let you
send him to work in the DFAC or something.
that's what that's the real solution.
Yeah.
That's the real solution. Figure out how to get rid of them
Yeah.
and make it somebody else's problem.
That's how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how it goes. But what they'll tell you is, hey, what you should do. I'll tell you the officer
Yeah.
answer, right?
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
they
Yep.
go, you sit them down, you counsel them, you let them know your
Develop a
expectations,
plan of
develop a
action
plan of
and
action, right? But all that stuff takes time, right? It
Mhm.
takes a lot of time, and
time that you
everybody's
probably
just,
don't have.
yeah, people are we don't have time to thrive in the army. We barely got time to survive. And so, if you take that time to develop that soldier and it doesn't work out, well, then now you've just buried yourself, because that soldier is still not contributing, but you weren't getting other stuff done. You weren't developing your high performers,
Yeah.
So like at the end of the day, like this is something that you both recognized, you both did it, like, because you said it's the same answer, like send the defect, get rid of them, right? And um that is honestly probably in a bureaucracy, if you're trying to be productive and meet mission,
Mhm.
like that's the real answer. Like that's the
What you
real
have to do.
technique that's going to be effective.
Well,
On the other hand, people would be like, "Oh no, that you're a bad leader. You messed up. You should have developed that soldier." And it's like, okay, like welcome to the
Yeah.
real world.
Well,
I
and
think it also depends on the job that you're in, because like me being infantry, or even a combat medic, like you need, so like a lot of the things that the army faces as far as like soldiers is always going to be something that takes them out of the game, right? They twisted their ankle, or they're sick, or there's some reason why they can't go to the field or they can't perform that specific thing. But the problem is, like, you need a physical body in my job. So if somebody's in quarantine for 2 weeks, or if it's the same person that's been on profile for 18 months or whatever, and he and he knows how to play the system of being on profile for 89 days or whatever, coming off for a couple weeks, going back on for a couple days or whatever, to not have that 180 days of being on profile within a 365-day period or whatever. Like, they know how to game the system for sure. And now the pack that person carried, the special equipment, the platoon equipment, the whatever stuff that we're bringing out, is now being cross-loaded across the other three or the other two members, because realistically the team leader, he's already carrying a whole bunch of other stuff. So now you just like added that person. It is so many more ways than one that somebody else has to carry your weight when you're like playing the system. You know what I think
Well,
there's
it's
getting your I think there's getting yours in getting a well-deserved break or something, after getting shit on, and then there's playing the system. I think.
I think there's definitely a line, and it comes to, no one knows. It's whatever's in that person's heart, and that's the thing that's so hard. Like I'll tell you from a provider perspective, um, you know, what that does to somebody's psychology if they are legit and they're trying to get better, but they're really hurt. So
Oh, I know. Yeah.
say somebody has a disc herniation, like a full,
Like my
yeah,
back's been
a
jacked
full
up for 6
herniation.
years. Yeah.
And when that's fresh and that just happened, like people can seriously be out of the fight for like 3 to 6 months,
Yeah.
and for like a whole month really just not able to do anything. And so say that happens, right? And they're in a light infantry unit, and they have to do exactly what you said. They got to spread that person's equipment out, and everybody's got to pick up the load, right? If that person hasn't had enough time to
recover.
no, to establish that they have credibility and that they're legit,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and that they're one of the team, and like say they just showed up, especially if they show up from AIT broken,
Yeah, as a brand new guy, like, it
they
does
are
not look good for me.
they're screwed, because
Yeah.
psychologically, like they're gonna get peered out from the
So many
team.
people have so
Yeah.
many people have cheated before them
Yeah.
that you automatically
Yeah.
assume that this person is cheating also.
And then it can become kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, where it's like
Yeah.
they're going to become a shitbag because you're treating them like a shitbag, and nobody believes
Right.
that they're legit. And so that can be,
Yeah.
dude, it's hard. It's really hard, because of the way that trust that, like, but there's solutions. The solution is like, don't send somebody broken from AIT, but they have their own incentives, where it's like they got to set them because they want to get rid of them, because boom, as soon as they're out of out of there, it's not their problem anymore. So
Yeah, and the army
it's
is
not
all
easy.
about, they're all about punishment, right? So they'll throw around UCMJ all day before mentor,
Only for
right?
enlisted though.
But yeah, well, for
It's true.
enlisted, I'm not gonna lie. My last unit, I had a first lieutenant on extra duty while I was on staff duty. That was a first. That was funny.
That's wild.
But but um you know, and just to put in perspective for people, generally you would have at least 400% of your time occupied as a leader. Like if you're saying they're taking notes in your meetings and you're writing down all the things you got to do, at least 400% of your time is occupied, and you got to try to knock out the ones that you can and ignore the other ones that you can't. And
Prioritizing.
yeah, and there would literally be days where you spend 11 hours out of 15 in meetings to get assignments on things you have to do, but you have a meeting you got to go to, and that's the way it goes, right?
And it's always something that had to have already been done.
Yeah, and I think it's funny. It makes me think of the North Korean generals and how you could defeat them with a magnet because they got all that bling, right? That's on there, and when you think about it, it's pretty sad because we haven't won a war during the lifetime of anybody serving today. We've been in war nonstop, but we didn't win Iraq. We didn't win Afghanistan. We didn't win the Gulf War because we went back for Iraq. We didn't win Vietnam. We didn't win Korea. It's still going. You know, World War II, Operation Paperclip. I don't call that a victory.
Yeah, right.
So, you know, what are we really spending the military's time on doing? And you know, it's things like Sharp and EO and those things we were talking about the other day, but it's not on mission focus. It's not on winning. It's not on protecting the American people.
Yeah.
Oh, my bad. Go ahead.
Well, I was just, I'll make this one quick point and then I'll turn it over to you, Rodney. But hopefully, like you guys know, it seems like an impossible problem to fix. Like it seems like all the challenges are insurmountable. But that's why I always point to that spiritual readiness piece. Because like you said, we haven't won a war. So what are we here for? Well, we gotta figure that out. You know, we gotta figure that out. We gotta talk about it and we gotta identify it. And the organization has to do a better job of communicating that. And it's got to be understood at all levels. Like one of the things that used to get said a lot was lethality. And that was like, you just pick like one word. And it's like, okay, everybody in this brigade knows that like, if you're not increasing lethality with what you're doing, just don't do it. And if you have command authority to do that, that like makes sense to everybody. So it's like, if you're doing something that's BS and you're like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this instead. And they're like, well, hey, why didn't you do X, Y, Z? And it's not stuff that increases lethality. You'd be like, well, because it's not going to increase lethality. And then you have top cover from your boss. So like stuff like that actually works and can make an organization work in spite of the bureaucracy. But senior leaders,
I don't think they want lethality anymore, though.
Well, that's the thing. I don't know that it's not that they don't want it. It's that the bureaucracy has gotten to a point where at the 06 level, you just have very few 06 brigade commanders that are willing to assume that kind of risk and say, yeah, like this is my priority. And
everybody's worried about getting the picky snack, man.
And it doesn't align necessarily with other stuff. Like like they're not willing to assume the risk that it's not going to reflect right to their boss. And I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and that used to be something that was really common, where a leader would come in and they would say things like General X Michael X Garrett or whatever. I heard that what he would say is like, so where does that, people would propose things, they say, well, where does that fall, how does that support the Army values, right? And you do that for everything, and supposedly, like when he was in charge of organizations, they did really well, and that makes sense to me. But that type of leadership is getting subsumed by this focus on metrics and these ancillary requirements, where it's like, if they're coming from the top down, they might not align with these principles, and we'll make exceptions for those, right? And it's like, well, as soon as you make exceptions, then all of a sudden nobody has that clear direction that can allow everybody at every level, mission command, it doesn't allow everybody at every level to understand the intent and get after it, and develop initiative. Sorry, go ahead, Ronnie.
So we were talking about the, like how you had talked, how you had seen like the same soldiers over and over. And I think I'm assuming you were more referring to like the quarantine and just like the same soldiers over sick call, but I'm more interested if you had seen like adverse effects.
No, honestly, nothing out of the normal.
So no, people aren't magically Bluetooth capable now.
No,
People aren't
yeah,
dropping dead like flies
yeah.
across the army
I
now.
was telling them if they grew a third ear on their back or something, I wanted to see it so I could, cut it off. But no, they for the most part, it was all regular. There was one person that was complaining of heart conditions walking around, a track during like recovery PT kind of thing. However, that happened multiple times, and I
So
went
it's
out
hard to not
there.
call
Yeah,
bullshit.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but I didn't see anything that I took as beyond normal.
What about like an uptick, like across the division in myocarditis or anything like that? Nothing that you had heard about in the medical community? Because part of me wondered if 2020 was literally just to create two ideologies, and really there's not really any adverse side effect, and a lot of stuff that we see pointing towards adverse side effects could easily be propaganda to continue the two ideologies of like, you people are gonna die
Well,
and you people are gonna die,
they definitely stratified the population into two extremes, obviously, right? And I'll say this, in the military, we get what, a dozen shots per year every year,
Yeah,
and I was in for 16 and a half, so I'd gotten over 100 shots over the last
right.
right.
As did I, and people would always bring up, like, why does it matter? You're in the military. It's not like you haven't gotten a million other shots. Like, that should go to prove that I'm not an anti-vaxxer.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, if anything, that should prove my point. That is like, this one I'm against,
yeah.
not any of the,
Well,
but I wasn't studied up when I got all my other ones. Now I won't
yeah,
take a single
exactly.
freaking vaccine
Exactly.
ever again, bro.
I will never take another vaccine because of the way they handled this one. They've killed my ability to trust them in any.
Yeah. Our whole perception of trust was just, dude, I had to get an MRI and they had to do it with contrast. And I was watching my freaking IV line like a hawk, dude, because I'm like, I don't know if this is some crazy radical behind some uniform and he's about to inject some stuff in my, like the hospital scene as a whole was just crazy for a good 2 years. And it's going to take a lot of work to trust it ever again.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I don't even want to get my daughter shots, like a very important one, HPV. My daughter keeps, or my wife keeps bringing up the HPV shot. And I'm like, man, right after they started talking about the COVID vaccine, they were talking about using mRNA in flu vaccines. So like, what really can we trust at this point,
Yeah.
And
That's really,
is that one of those things where it's just, have they turned me into a psychopath that's just extremely paranoid?
so.
Or
I don't think that. The hard thing with vaccines is they're preventative, right? So if you're talking about a medication, and so this is something that you have to think about all the time in the rehab world, like in physical therapy, because everything gets better on its own, right? Like almost everything. You get injured, you get a musculoskeletal injury, it almost always heals. So you really can't be super confident that you're getting somebody better that wouldn't have gotten better otherwise, unless it's like a chronic
right.
issue and they've failed therapy before. Then you can kind of be like, yeah, I'm able to make a difference. With vaccines, it's way more difficult in the research to demonstrate their efficacy because of the incidence of these diseases being so low. In order to have enough statistical power to find out if it's beneficial or not, and to assess risks, given that so many people, the number needed to treat in order to prevent one infection is so high, sometimes in the tens of thousands. I mean, it is calculated for COVID for young folks in a recent paper. The number needed to treat for young, healthy folks is 30 to 40,000. You know, so 30 to 40,000 people need a COVID shot in order to prevent one hospitalization, according to their analysis, which I was spot on as far as I could tell. And that means really, in order for that vaccine to be a no-go for that population, if it seriously injures or hospitalizes 1 in every 10,000 people, that vaccine's it's a catastrophe, because not only does it cost a lot of money, but it injures 4 times as many people as it helps. And so you look at the profitability of the pharmaceutical industry, and they're not particularly profitable anymore, because it turns out it's very difficult to develop medications that are very effective. You know, when you get sick, take a medication and boom, it works and fixes it. Like, that's actually very difficult to do. It requires a lot of skill, and most of the things that can do that have already been discovered and they're already available. In fact, they were available so long ago that their patents have already run out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So when you're trying to develop new medications, it's much easier to play games with the data and show something works to prevent something that's super rare than it is to develop a new drug that can cure something that's
Actually
a
cure
long-standing
something.
issue. And the problem that you run into over and over again, like even for really popular vaccines that, you know, seem to have a good risk benefit profile, like polio, as they go, well, look, like polio disappeared, and it's like, well, you know, things with sanitation changed, and those rates seem to be taking a nosedive, perhaps prior to you know, that vaccine. And that's like the best, the quintessential example of an incredibly effective vaccine that eradicated polio, because it was a sterilizing vaccine. You know, smallpox,
Right.
there was,
Or like the MMR or
yeah,
smallpox,
exactly,
or,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
those
all
were
these things, there's,
effective vaccinations.
yeah,
Yeah.
but even those, there are debates, and like you can look back, and there were prominent physicians in the times, because smallpox is where, you know, we're really, this is the legacy of the smallpox forced
Yeah,
vaccinations.
I wouldn't
And
necessarily say I trust the smallpox vaccine.
yeah,
Like,
but in
yeah.
any case, like, I think what medical science should be focused on is focused on developing treatments that work once you get sick, because there's not like a scientific reason that that's impossible to accomplish.
Yeah.
Really, the reason is there's
So like better
monitoring.
therapeutics after the
yeah,
fact
there's
instead of preventative measures.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's financial reasons that they haven't done that, but there's not like laws of physics that preclude that from being a possibility, or for that biotechnology to be available, you know, or for those medicines to be developed. And then you wouldn't have to coerce anybody or try and convince anybody. The proof would be in the pudding. It'd be very obvious. It'd be like, I'm sick, and it's like, okay, well, I'm sick now, so I want medicine. And then they take it and they get better, or they wouldn't. And then, you know, it could end all of this hemming and hawing. But there will always be a lot, and so that's why trust was so critical for vaccines, is because the establishment did a really good job over the years of developing trust in vaccines, in spite of the fact that for some of them the risk benefit probably wasn't there, or might not have been, especially not being able to demonstrate it in court, for example, which is why you know, the federal government kind of differentiated liability out, so that vaccine manufacturers, like anything that was on the children's schedule, they couldn't be litigated against. And there was a special fund that was created for people who were vaccine injured that almost never pays out. But like, the rabbit hole on vaccines in general goes pretty
Yeah, it's pretty
deep,
wild.
and it's just not super clear. And then you add in the extra layer of complication where perhaps one of the adverse events is autoimmune disease, and then everything's out the window in terms of your data, because if you're trying to evaluate that, well, we don't understand autoimmune disease very well at all. You know,
Right.
what causes autoimmune disease, we don't really know. It's not well understood at all. And so to say for sure we know that vaccines don't cause autoimmune disease, well, that's not a very scientific position to have. Like that can't be supported by the data, because it's not a research question we have an answer to, because we don't understand autoimmune disease. So they really screwed the pooch on forcing the COVID vaccine, which I will tell you on my, like, I've looked into it extensively. I'm very confident to say that it has a negative risk benefit profile for young healthy folks.
I would agree.
I think we really screwed the pooch.
Yeah. Well,
like,
I mean,
they can screw the pooch all they want,
but they annihilated
the
people's
aspect.
trust. They annihilated people's trust in vaccines, and it's now, and it's the entire medical establishment. Because if you'll notice, like I've noticed taking my kids to the pediatrician is not focused on the overall health of my child. They are focused on trying to
reason for the visit.
Vaccines. That's what they're focused on. And they're willing to entertain discussion about it to a certain extent, and say, hey, we recommend this one and that one. But it's like, well, do you recommend the COVID vaccine for my child? And it's like, well, yeah, I would. And it's like, okay, well, I can't trust your judgment then, because it's absolutely ludicrous. My child's not at risk of severe disease from COVID. So no matter, even if it was saline and it was completely safe, it would still be at the very least a waste of money. And you're puncturing the skin, and every time you do that, there's a chance of infection. So like things that are super low risk, like 1 in a million or 1 in 10 million, all of a sudden those outweigh the potential benefits. And now we're talking about a novel technology using mRNA that's only even been around for 2 years. It's like, that's just terrible clinical reasoning, and pediatricians recommend it all the time, which is an indictment of their credibility.
Speaking of that, let's go there. What's everybody's opinion on the whole transhumanism thing? Like, is it an aspect of it? Is it? I mean, is it just one of those things that divides the people? Is it just another psyop? Like, what do you guys think up with that?
Quite a few players going for that. Epstein was researching transhumanism. I think I'm forgetting the basketball player was partnered with him on this. I think LeBron James, don't quote me on that. As well as other things, and he was doing that through none other than Harvard University, and I'm sure he had some linking with the microbiologist there. But as far as what they're actually attempting to accomplish, I have no idea, to be blunt.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely hard to say for sure, and that's the problem, is we got so many theories being thrown at us from every single side, and that goes into what you were, the term that you had applied to it. What do you call it? Yeah, limited hangout, where are all these plots to the story popping up because it all is bringing us to one path, 2030 or whatever it is, or who knows? Or was it just, was it as something as simple as overturning an election? Was it as something as simple as wanting everybody hiding inside their house while government and cartel type organizations human trafficked? Like, why I don't know, why do you feel like everybody was forced to, or was told to go inside their home? I mean, do you have any aspects or thoughts about that? I mean, because you had seen what you had seen in the Philippines to make you draw certain connections, and now everybody's being told don't go outside. For the first time ever, we can take pictures of entire cities with no people, no cars, no nothing, man. It is like a complete ghost town across the entire world.
Yeah, so I viewed it more through a financial lens of what that did to the economy, shutting it down, and what that did to the dollar. We printed 60% of all money in circulation within about 2 years, which for those that math, that's about 140% inflation. It's definitely not the the 8 to 9% we've been hearing about, which is totally manipulated numbers through the CCPI and all that stuff. But so I saw it through that lens as far as this was something that was going to crash the dollar, and it was going to crash the stock market, and it was going to make, you know, the debt bubble burst effectively. And we saw
Right,
all these stimuluses too.
and just to clarify, we're what I'm assuming that you're implying, we're not even close. We're not even close to the the like the stock market has a lot farther way to go.
Oh yeah, I think it can get
yeah, like
worse.
it's gonna between like crypto and stocks, and until like certain things come to light, or what I think they're doing is they printed that $5 trillion stimulus, and they have a system to get it back.
Well,
That's what I
they
think they're
already
really
do,
doing.
right? So
Yeah,
the richest people gained something like $2 trillion of wealth during the pandemic, and it's very simple math, right? So the poor people that only live paycheck to paycheck, they get this money, and what do? They spend it.
they go buy
They go to
shit.
Amazon, they pay whatever bill, it goes to a landlord, it goes to Jeff
They
Bezos.
stimulate the economy.
Exactly. They stimulate the economy, but the people that own the economy, they get that money. That all floats right to
Right.
the top. Because the people at the bottom gain that, they can't afford to hold on to it. They need things.
And I don't even think the people at the top really care about the money, honestly.
The dollar figure is meaningless. So it's the percentage of influence.
So I was gonna say another way of saying it that I think is that makes more sense to me is that it was a massive wealth transfer from lower income and middle income Americans to the wealthiest people in the world.
Which
that's essentially what it is, that transferred wealth. And if you're trying to look at it in terms of nominal values, it gets very confusing, right? Because of inflation and value and the relative value of different fiat currencies. But if you just look at it in terms of like who has control of wealth, well,
not us.
Middle class Americans, they lost their businesses, right? A bunch of people that, anybody that owned a restaurant, and
it largely
COVID was vital. COVID was vital to all of that happening.
And it felt like a war on the middle class.
Yeah,
it really did, man. Like there was like a trade war that was like very, and not even was it like a war just on the people, but then they were also like perpetuating this war between countries and this trade war that was happening. Like, don't act like y'all didn't organize this yourselves across a phone call or something. You know what I mean? I really think I don't think anything happens to chance like that. I really think everything is pre-coordinated, pre-orchestrated, like whatever's going on between China and the US, it's the citizens of the US have no idea of like what actually goes on. You know what I mean? Like I think that we're painted this narrative of a conflict that we're supposed to envision between America and China, but realistically, like they're one and the same, working with and towards and for each other, but in a way that makes it look like they're operating against each other. And it's the archetype. It's the archetype of chaos, man. Right is wrong, freaking wrong is right, left is right, right is left. You know.
Yep, we're definitely in a good is evil, evil is good times.
Real, man. So it's really a question of if goodness is going to prevail, like that's what we all hear about throughout our lifetime is, how the evil always comes to light and the goodness will prevail and whatnot. And I hope that is the case. We're going on 2 hours now, Patrick. Do you have anything additional that you'd like to
no, and I actually am supposed to be in another meeting in about 10 minutes.
Oh, damn, my bad.
Oh, no, you're good.
Okay, so let's wrap up.
I would have totally forgotten about it, but you just reminded me.
No, it was good to have you on for sure. And, hopefully you'll come on again, man. I'm assuming that you are, obviously you're a very well established person You've done very well for yourself. You have a firm educational background. You have a firm military background, a firm leadership background. You're obviously a person of sound reason and intelligence, and I think that that's important for us moving forward. For humanity moving forward, our channel moving forward, just trying to get people to do the right thing, man. And dude, if you ever want to come on, if you ever got something to talk about, you ever got a message that you want to say to the world, man, you just shoot us a text and hop on.
All
Or
right.
if you want to, blow the lid off from some stuff, let's make it happen, man.
All right.
So I'm sure you got a whole bunch more stuff to say, man.
I
So,
do have some other things up my sleeve.
Yeah. But Grant, you got anything?
Yeah, just thanks for taking the time to talk with us, Patrick. I really appreciate what you're doing in the civilian world now, in finance, because we just talked about that wealth transfer thing. I think that's part of the answer, is increasing the power of the middle class and lower income folks. They got to get educated on this stuff and how that process works. And we have to develop ways that can interdict that process, or else it's going to be a perpetual way that people that are politically connected can extract wealth and political power and influence from average, Americans in terms of income. So I think you're doing a really good job of providing leadership on that front, and super glad that you were able to parlay, your career where, I'm sure you did great things for the Army and, took great care of soldiers, but then got pushed
Your
out.
legacy starts here, though.
And I think it's just a pleasure to talk with you. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you,
For
Grant, and thank you, Rodney.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, take it easy, guys.
All right.
See you next time.
Have a good one, gentlemen.